This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Well, hello and welcome to the first episode of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. Today you're in for a treat. I can't think of a better way to start off a new podcast than with a family friend, which is my sister-in-law, my wife's sister. She's a first-year teacher at Falls Lake Academy in North Carolina. Where my in-laws live, and we talk all things what she's learned and dove into that first when we recorded this, 4 or 5 months or so of being in it, and we have a blast. So stay tuned here in just a few moments for the first ever episode of the School Success Podcast. She is a teacher at the awesome school of Falls Lake Academy there in, I think, is it Creedmoor, North Carolina? Am I right?
It is. It's kind of in the middle of Creedmoor and Butner, but Creedmoor works.
There you go. So right outside of, Raleigh-Durham area, go Duke, right? And I know she's a Tar Heels fan, but well, that's a conversation for another day. But Morgan, welcome to the podcast and being willing to hop on the first edition as we jump into this. So I'll let you introduce yourself and share anything you want to share real quick before I dive into some questions I got for you.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me. I feel like it's a privilege to be on the first episode, and being a brand new teacher, I'm honored that you would even think to ask me. So I'm Morgan Easter. I am 22, and I am a brand new third grade teacher, and I teach math and science.
Good deal. Well, so you just started. I think you're into have you finished your first official month? Or are we into month 2 right now?
We're in month 2, getting close to month 3. We started school August 10th. So we don't start when traditional schools start, towards the end of August. So we have had our first full month, and we're almost done with month 2.
Okay. And you guys are a Falls Lake Academy. So it is a charter school. It's not a traditional public school, correct?
Yes. So Falls Lake is a public charter school, which makes it a little different than other academies or other private schools, so to say. Falls Lake has to still meet requirements that public schools meet. Just the way that they have information is a little bit different. For example, the funding that Falls Lake gets is different than public schools. So each child, I learned this at the beginning of my training. I thought it was one of the coolest things. So each child has essentially a number on their head, their worth. That's the same for public and charter. However, public schools have different domains where they have to spend money in. So, for example, public schools have to spend money on transportation. They have to spend money on lunches and a cafeteria. They have to spend it on textbooks, calculators, things of that nature. Whereas charter schools, all of their money goes into one pot, and it does not matter how they spend it. They can spend it in any number of ways, however they choose to do so. That's one thing that I think is really cool. I think it crushes one of the stereotypes that people think of charter schools. Typically, people think of them and they're like, oh, charter schools, they think they're better than everybody else. But that's not necessarily true. They have more flexibility in what they can do because their funding they don't have to spend it on certain things. They can spend it on whatever they choose.
Okay. And I like that. And then we have a client that is a charter school, and that's kind of the rundown that they gave. They have a lot more freedom than a traditional public school, because public school is like, oh, we have this money, again, like you just mentioned, for this and this. And then they kind of, as a school leader, can go, oh, we want to spend money on this right now because we have it in the budget, or we want to spend money on whatever it ends up being. It's kind of makes it easy, especially if we're saying, hey, I think this would be really good for marketing for your school to help grow enrollment or to do whatever it is. And they're like, yeah, let's try it. Let's do it. And they can easily say it without having to go up the chain of command, I guess, to the different districts and approval from superintendent, all that fun stuff. But
Right.
so does your budgeting, and I know you've only been there a couple months, so maybe you don't have all the answers for all these, but does the budget that you guys get from the state of North Carolina go to pay teacher salaries as well, or is that completely separate from the money that's per student?
I'm pretty positive that it is included. From my understanding, every dollar, penny, everything we get goes into one big pot, one account, and they could use that money to hire more staff. They could use it to get transportation if they wanted to do a football team if they wanted to, whatever they want to use it for. My understanding is how they do it.
Okay. So now you've been there a couple months, and obviously obviously since you're in my family, I've been following this journey of you going to college and getting all this stuff ready for your first year of teaching. So you've had all these ideas of what your first year would look like and what it was going to be, and you got obviously into a great school. How is it related to what you thought it was going to be and what it's been these first 2 months?
I think some days it's exactly what I thought. It's so exciting, just come in, they're happy to see you, get hugs from so many of them, and everything's just so happy and good. But then, everybody has days where it's kind of like, it's dragging by. The kids don't seem to understand anything you're telling them, even though you thought you had the best lesson planned, and it completely blows. So then you have to go back and rethink what did I miss? What did I say something wrong that, didn't allow them to understand, or what? But I would say majority of it has been really exciting, kind of what I thought it would be like. It's definitely very busy. I had that assumption coming in that it would be pretty busy, but it's really busy. Like, I feel like on the weekends, I don't want to do anything. I just want to, stay at home, relax. And even most weekends, I'm at home grading papers and then spending Sundays preparing for the next lesson. So even sometimes it doesn't feel like it ever really ends. So
do you have the flexibility of what you teach, or are you held into this little thing of like, hey, Morgan, this is what you have to teach on, or do you kind of get to pick what to teach and the way you want to teach it?
Sort of. So I think kind of what you're talking about is called direct instruction. Direct instruction is where the school hands you a book and says, read from it. I have dealt a little bit with that during my student teaching. Their language arts was that way. They literally would hand you a book and say, read exactly what it says, do exactly what the activity they have is. However, Falls Lake is not direct instruction. They do have to follow the 𝗠ance standard course of study, which is put together from the Department of Education, and we have to follow it, but we do have that flexibility of how we teach it, how we approach it, what kind of activities we do, whether you do hands-on stuff, whether you move around, or whether you just do a worksheet. So I do like that about Falls Lake.
Okay. I like that they give you the flexibility there. That's what I would want as well, because I feel like I teach a different way, and I love hands-on learning. That's how I learn better. And I know obviously every kid is completely different with how they learn. So that's also
Yeah,
great.
it's very cool. For science in third grade, part of what we learn or what we teach is the human body systems, and one part is the intestines. And so I found this cool activity where you take a garden hose and have it balled up and you hold it in front of you, and that gives students a really good picture of that's kind of what's inside me. It's just shrunken down much more, but that's what's inside me. And then you can take them outside and unravel the garden hose to see, this 20-foot hose is the equivalent of my intestines inside me. It's kind of gross, but I say this to say Falls Lake has that flexibility where I could go to my principal and say, hey, I need 15 garden hoses. Is that something we could get? And they would more than likely say yes, based on what I found and what I plan to do with it. So that's very cool.
I do love that. No, it's good. And the hands-on, I'm telling you, I feel like the best way to teach and to learn. And it's fun. It's something they can picture in their mind and then talk about later on to be like, my intestines are like a garden hose. And I've never heard that put that way. So I do like that. You're already teaching me there, Morgan. Good job. So you've been in there 2 months. Obviously, you're new, you haven't been in there for years yet, but I would love to get your take on how do you see Falls Lake as a school in the terms of like how successful they are. I've heard obviously good things since you guys have been in the family for, I've been in your family, I guess I should say, for years, knowing that's a great school and it's had great success. So I'd love to hear kind of what do they do really good that you've seen going, man, I really love this about our school. And is there anything you've seen just in a couple months going, man, I would love to see us do better in this area?
Okay. So one thing that Falls Lake does very well is something called project-based learning. I may refer to it as PBL. That's just the acronym that everybody uses. So project-based learning is a hands-on way of learning that starts with a driving question, and then you come up with what students need to know for this project. And this is a 9-week long project. So this isn't just hey, sit down, do this project at home. This is a whole 9 weeks thing. We have 45 minutes a day dedicated to this project. And you start by looking at the overall picture. What do you want the students to be able to do? What do you want them to learn through this? And what I like about PBL is that it integrates many subjects into one project. So for example, there's a PBL that is called Building a Zoo. So my third graders will do that soon when we start our next 9 weeks. So if you break down building a zoo, you have to think about ecosystems, habitats, animals, area and perimeter, because you have to fence in where the animals are going to be, budgeting, finances. I mean, all these different things that can go into this one project. So that so far is the most excited PBL, or I'm most excited for that PBL because, I love animals and it incorporates all of these things into one project. So you teach those things kind of to the project so they're able to do that. And then the goal would be by the end of the 9 weeks, students do a presentation of learning. The community is available to come, parents can come, anybody that knows about it is eligible to come. Of course, with COVID right now, we can't have anybody come, but we're hoping after the next 9 weeks that maybe that will change. But during this presentation of learning, students literally build a zoo. Like they may pick, a habitat to dress up as and to make. They may make it on a poster. They may, choose to dress up as a habitat. What I like about PBLs is that there's no limitation. You are not allowed to tell students, do it like this, build it like this. It is any way that they would like to build it. So then during that presentation of learning, we take, a couple hours and have the community come in. And it's almost like a fair type thing where you walk around to each station and the students will tell you, everything they've had to do to get to this project, everything that they've learned to be able to do it, and how they came to this. And I think it's awesome. It's one of the things that drew me to Falls Lake. It's very cool.
Okay, so there you go. Something you think they do really well. It sounds like I love that because I think it's very child-led, and I like that it's letting their imagination go, which I think is really good for development. So now we go for things you think they could improve on. You've only been there a couple months. Anything you're like, man, I wish this. Anything crazy?
So one thing that I have noticed recently is that it seems as if everyone at Falls Lake wears too many hats or has too many jobs. For example, this example always comes to mind. Our tech lady, very nice, very sweet, very organized. However, she has at least 5 or 6 different jobs that she is fully in charge of, not just, a helper. She's fully in charge of these things. And these are big things such as Jupiter Ed, which is it's very similar to Power School. It's our whole thing. We do grades there, lesson plans there. We take roll there. She's in charge of that. She's also in charge of tech, and we are a K-12 school. So that, talking about at least 4 teachers per grade level. I mean, there's countless computers, and third third grade through 8th grade all have a classroom set of computers. So she's got to, I mean, there's a lot she has to take care of just with tech. So there's Jupiter, tech. She is in charge of a running team that meets after school. She is the media coordinator. She does cross country. Trying to think what else. She also teaches, like, on top of all of that as well. And so one thing that is a little frustrating to me is that sometimes I have issues with technology, and I don't even want to go to her to ask for help because I don't want to bother her. Like, she's got many other probably way more important things going on. And so for me, I'm having a small inconvenient problem. It's easier for me just to deal with it than to try and go get help from her because she's got so many other roles that she plays. And she does a very great job at it, but sometimes it is inconvenient when you do need that help and you have to wait a while or you can't get the help. Like, for example, I had a new student start 3 weeks ago or so now, and every student has their own individualized login to the computer. I did not get him a login until like Monday, and he's been at the school for 3 weeks. And so we do things on the computer probably about daily or every other day. And so for him not to have a login, I was having to log him in as myself, which is giving him a lot of trust to be logged into a computer, as a teacher. So that's just one thing I've noticed that could be improved. Another example, my house like does directors instead of principals. So there's a K2 director, which is the same thing as a principal. Then there's 3-5 middle school and then high school. So my director is essentially principal for 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. And she is also now the testing administrator. And so even just having those 2 jobs, like, even she sometimes seems, distant when I'm trying to talk to her or ask her questions. And I don't know about you, but that's one of my peeves. Like, if you want to sit down and talk to me, great, but seem present. Don't clearly be elsewhere. I'm trying to ask you for help or, guidance, anything like that. Like, I need you to be present and really hear my issue and provide me with a solution, not be thinking about your other job that you have. So that's just one way that I think Falls Lake could improve on that, maybe hiring a couple extra people for support.
Okay, no, it's good. And I feel like, man, so many places, especially right now, I feel like across the whole country are like need help. You go to like the fast food places, everybody's hiring, everybody's like short staffed and needed. And I mean, I bet you schools, I know I've heard from talking to other schools as well as they have a hard time finding subs. And I guess this year, I don't know if you've heard this, maybe this is what you guys are dealing with too. I've heard schools are having a hard time finding math teachers. Like, I guess math was really hard to come by. I don't know if Falls Lake is having a hard time keeping like with that department. Is that something in the higher levels that they're having trouble too?
So I don't know math particularly, but I do know over the summer Falls Lake posted, gosh, it was probably 6 or 7 job openings, and I was shocked. At that point I had already accepted my position, but I was just shocked. Like, Falls Lake is not somewhere that you typically see that many openings. And so I started to kind of ask around, and I was like, hey, did something happen? Like, why are so many people leaving? What's going on with that? And they just, I told you the one teacher, but everybody else just couldn't do it with COVID. They just saw so many teachers leaving and, deciding to homeschool their kids or even just to not work. And so it really put a damper on a lot of schools because they didn't have any teachers. And I think on top of COVID, with COVID, seeing even more things that are expected of teachers has put a damper on teachers, because not only are we, teaching these kids, but we're having to look out for their social and emotional well-being. Are they okay? Do they come to school with food? Do they come to school dressed, appropriately? Like, Do their clothes fit them? Are they being nice to kids? Then we're having to talk to parents, and not just usual conversations with parents. Like when we talk to parents on Zoom, a lot of parents just come on there and tell you, like, they have a therapy hour with you. Like they want to tell you everything that's been going on and talk to you about how hard COVID has been for them, and which is very understandable. But at the same time, it's not our job to be their therapist, so to say. And so I think that has really kind of burned out a lot of teachers. Not necessarily me, because I haven't fully experienced that yet, but it was hard for a lot of people to have to do that, as well as deal with their own lives at home, then have to hear all of this about, what's going on in other people's homes and their students' homes. Because really, while we're in person, we see the kids almost more than their parents do. And so we really get to know them very well. And then so the parents want to join in on that as well and share a little too much about what's going on at home, And so I think that really burnt out a lot of teachers last year.
Man, and I can imagine. And I mean, as much as obviously you guys aren't therapists, what an opportunity to be an encouragement to these parents who are, this last year, of course, COVID is just really wreaked havoc on so many families and lives and people across the world, I guess. But you can be there to be that positive impact, going, man, I'm loving your kid when he's here. I'm teaching your kid, man, and he's doing great. Like you can do like all, hopefully make it the negative into a positive, which Morgan, obviously knowing you personally, I know you're very, very good at that to begin with. But it's a lot that teachers are being asked of. I mean, in short, I have a ton of just absolute respect for teachers and what they do day to day to educate that next generation and to give to those kids. And obviously I was homeschooled my whole life, so my mom was my teacher, so I love my mom. But I know the teachers that I had in like church, like Sunday school teachers and stuff, I have so many memories still as an adult of these teachers that I had just even once a week for Sunday school, and the impact they made in my life on one day. So I can't even imagine how much impact you're having on these kids who have you for an entire, 9 months, 10 months, whatever it is. That's incredible. So like an opportunity, you're going to have all these kids. I think it's going to be really cool is when these kids grow up and they're going to have kids, and maybe you're still teaching and those kids now are in your class, Morgan. One, you'll feel super old, which, you'll be old by then, I guess. But what a cool thing when they remember you at that point, for like, oh, I had Miss Easter. She was so fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. It's funny. The kids think I'm old now. So I'm like, you just wait. I'm like, I just turned 22. Like, I am not old. But then I say things that are cool to them, and they're like, oh, she is cool. Oh my gosh. And it's so funny to see their faces sometimes. They're like, you know about that? You've heard that? And I'm like, well, yeah, like I'm really not that much older than you, so.
Because you're third grade, so that's what, like 10 years old? 8. Okay. Well, I'm really bad at that. All right. So, okay.
Over the summer, I taught 5th grade, and that was funny because these kids were 10 and 11, and I was 21, so I was like, I'm only 10 years older than you. Like, I'm old enough to be your sibling. And they were just shocked.
Very good. Well, Morgan, I love that you're a teacher, and I love that you're pursuing your dreams and teaching, and obviously got into a great school. Wish you absolutely nothing but the best, of course, in this coming year, and can't wait to hear about how the rest of the school year went. And a huge thank you again for hopping on the podcast, the first edition, as we hopefully help teachers and leaders across the country in schools have better schools and educate their students even better than they are. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I definitely felt honored to be here today. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, a huge shout out to Morgan Easter for being on the first ever edition of the School Success Podcast. She crushed it, and I was so proud of her for being willing to put herself out there and during her first year to be on a podcast that her brother-in-law was starting. So Morgan, thank you so much. I hope you guys learned at least one thing from the episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. You're going to learn a ton more from this podcast as we make more and more episodes, so tune in to the next one on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.